So let me give a little backup before we get to this slide. If you read the scientific articles about the origin or the sort of the basis of transgenderism, you'll see that there's a strong emphasis in that it's biological, it's something innate. There's some kind of gender identity that everybody has, and it's just that some people are born this way. They have a built-in, they're the opposite sex in their brains, like Bruce Jenner. This is based on the assertions of a few psychologists. It's not based on any scientific evidence, it's not research. It's just in the 60s they began just saying, well, yeah, it's built in, it's part of who they are. And that just kind of took hold, and it's not based on anything. And so over the course of the past 30 years, they've been looking at people's brains and thinking about what about hormones in utero and all these various ways that people might have had their gender identity scrambled. And it all looks very nice when you read the paper. They say, whoa, there's tantalizingly close evidence, and it's very, very suggestive of some association here. It's spin, and if you read it carefully, there's nothing really in there that connects. There's enormous gaps. It takes a huge leap of faith to even say that there's anything connected. There's probably 10 or 20 other more likely explanations for any associations they do see. So they just selectively choose these outcomes, and pretty much all of the science investigating that is an exercise in confirmation bias and selection bias, where they're just trying to, we have an idea, this is how we think this is happening. Of course, we want this to be what we're showing. So in the 60s, after maybe 20 or 30 years of a few adults piping up and saying, "Oh, I think I'm the opposite sex," they began to think, "Wow, these kids, what about when they were kids? Maybe we can catch these kids early." And I guess after the 50s, transsexualism was played out in the media. There was a big case in Denmark, actually was an American who went to Denmark, and it was all over the mass media. They started making films, Some Like It Hot. You had all this exploration of gender, a lot of films. Myra Breckinridge and I don't know, a whole bunch of different films began looking at gender stuff, and so as people were thinking about it, and so they brought their kids in when they would be playing around with the boy would put on his mom's shoes, the girl would want to climb a tree or something, and they'd bring these kids into the doctors, who would be very intrigued, like, oh, the gender identity of these kids, we've got to see if we can alternately try to prevent transsexualism, or later begin to steer them into it. So in the Netherlands, they got the idea based on the sad sob stories of older transsexuals who had had surgery and what miserable childhoods they'd had as the opposite sex in their brains. They thought, what if we just block their puberty? That might be good. Buy them time to explore. Never mind that since then, I think all children who have begun a course of puberty blockers have continued with the process. They don't go off it. And so in the Netherlands, they specify, they start around 11 or 12 with the blockers, and in hormones around age 15 or 18. But of course, in the United States, they start much earlier. They start the blockers around 8 or 9, because you never know. I mean, basically, if you have kids taking this and you say, we're just checking it out, you might really be, a boy might really be a girl might really be a boy, they're thinking, okay, yeah, I'm the opposite sex, and they're just getting entrained into this whole pattern. And so it's a one-way trip. You don't go off these things, and even if you do, what happens? The boy is 3 inches shorter, his voice hasn't broken, the girl hasn't developed, she hasn't had menstruation. All of her peers have. They don't change back.
I am a mother whose daughter has identified as transgender since the age of 14. I am here today because I love her, and because I care deeply about her and other kids who identify as transgender. These are young people, like my daughter, who are in turmoil and who are not getting the compassionate care that they need and deserve. I am going to explain to you what happens when parents seek out expert advice to help their transgender identifying children explore their feelings and discomfort with their sex. What is affirmative care? The current standard of treatment promoted by medical and psychological associations is called affirmative care. Well, this sounds nice. Affirmative care leads directly to putting children on the path to medical transition with little chance of turning back. Let me explain to you how this works. If you take your child to a clinic to seek help, affirmative care means the therapist must follow the child's lead. The professionals must accept a child's gender identity. In fact, this is the law in many states. Under conversion therapy bans, questioning a child's gender identity is now illegal. So if a little boy is 5 years old and believes he is the opposite sex, affirmative care means going along with his beliefs. Parents are encouraged to refer to him as their daughter and let him choose a feminine name. Teachers are told to let him use the girls' bathroom at school. Therapists will reassure parents that social transition is harmless and reversible. Is it really harmless to tell a child who still believes in the tooth fairy that he is the opposite sex? Isn't it quite likely that this child is just confused? If a 10-year-old girl is uncomfortable with her developing body and suddenly insists she is a boy, affirmative care means blocking this girl's puberty with powerful drugs. Doctors will tell parents this is a perfectly safe and reversible way for her to explore her gender. Affirmative care does not help this child get to the cause of her discomfort. Medicating her with these drugs is not safe. In fact, her future fertility, sexual functioning, and bone development may be negatively impacted. Once the teenage years begin, affirmative care means giving young people cross-sex hormones. Girls as young as 12 are prescribed testosterone for lifetime usage, while boys are given estrogen. These are serious hormonal treatments that impact brain development, cardiovascular health, and may increase the risk of cancer. There are no long-term studies to prove this is necessary, safe, or prudent, while there are many known hazards to using these same hormones when medically treating adults.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for putting this panel together. It's a topic that everybody brings a different perspective to, and if you haven't come to the conclusion yet, this is very complicated, and it has many different layers, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get to all of them, but we definitely need to open up a discussion about it. I lived 8 years as a female named Laura Jensen after undergoing gender reassignment surgery in April of 1983. I started as a 4-year-old kid in 1944. So I'm bringing to this conversation today 74 years of firsthand experience in some way, either living it or trying to deal with it or trying to recover from it. It's important, I think, to understand that everything that we've heard today is damaging to children. And I was damaged by this, and I have some very strong points of view. So I hope that don't take exception to them. They come out of pain. They come out of real life experience. I'm not trying to be hurtful to anybody, but I think that I have a website called sexchangeregret.com, and we get letters from either the parents or the transgenders themselves asking for help after they've lived the life like I did for 5, 6, 15, 18, 20, all the way up to 30 years. And they're saying, Walt, can you help me detransition? This was the biggest mistake of my life. I've met with people personally. We've had the honor and pleasure of working with people who are now detransitioning. Just recently, a school teacher, a pharmacist, and a good friend, Jamie Shoup. I think it's important for us to realize that there is actually nothing good about affirming a young boy, 4 years old, like my grandma did me. The moment you affirm a child, like my grandma did, putting me in a purple chiffon dress and telling me how cute I was, how wonderful I looked, is at the very same moment that you're affirming that young person, you're telling them there's something wrong with them, that you're not right. That is child abuse. We need to begin calling it what it is. It's not affirming a child. It's causing them to be depressed and anxious about who they are. And then we go on to inject hormone blockers into them and begin altering their body. Can we begin to understand today from these discussions how destructive this is to the psyche? It's no wonder they end up with separation anxiety and bipolar disorder, dissociative disorders, schizophrenia, and many other disorders that they want you to ignore. They want to block any child from having access to psychotherapy. The only reason that I'm able to speak to you today is because after 46 years of dealing with this issue, I was able to detransition in 1990 after I had extensive psychotherapy, the very same psychotherapy that they're trying to prevent people from having. Why? Because they don't want them to detransition. Because somebody like me puts a real bad mark on the idea that it's all good, because it isn't. I've recently written a book, Trans Life Survivors, that has the stories in them. It's painful to get these emails from people whose lives have been totally torn apart. Men like myself, who was married, had 2 children, had a career. I was an executive for American Honda Motor Company. One of those therapists who was an advocate for gender change surgery told me that what happened to you as a child wearing that purple dress, the only way to solve that is to have cross-gender hormones and undergo reassignment surgery. That's the solution. Well, I trusted his expertise because Dr. Walker had actually written the original international standards of care for treatment of gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria. I'm here because he was wrong. I'm here because those standards of care have morphed into what they're using today. They haven't changed much. Yeah, they've gone through revision after revision, but the basic idea is that when somebody comes in, they can self-diagnose their gender dysphoria. We are manufacturing transgender kids. We are manufacturing their depression, their anxiety, and it's turned into a huge industry that people are profiting from after kids' lives are completely torn apart. The most vulnerable people in our society and adults are tearing their lives apart. It's really beyond my understanding why we're even having this discussion, because it shouldn't be happening. I don't believe any doctor who injects a young person with hormone blockers should have a license to do so. I would prefer that they not have that ability. And I hope that people begin to realize this and begin to speak up about it. There is absolutely nothing good about affirming somebody in a cross-gender identity because it destroys their life. We won't see the consequences of what they're doing today until 10 or 15 years later. And there'll be somebody else speaking up like I am, saying, it was horrible what they did to me. They never should have done it. The people are suffering. We're not trying to minimize their suffering. But why do we abuse them with hormone blockers and cut their bodies apart as a way to affect treatment? It's insane, actually. It doesn't make any sense. If we're just to pause and take a sober breath, it's insanity. When will we finally grasp this. Christina Olson, a research psychologist in Washington, at Washington University, and I wrote the article, is published in Public Discourse in 2017, June. She said, "We do not know who the transgender kids are. One way or the other, we don't know who they are." Do you get that? We don't know who they are. Should sink in. They cannot actually identify who trans kids are except by them saying so. There is no test. There's no proof. A parent can actually cause a kid to be gender dysphoric by affirming them. The APA, which an article is going to come out in the Daily Signal in the next couple of days that I just finished last night, the APA in their handbook in 2014 says kids are not born transgender. And yet, we're treating them with medical treatment as if they were, and trying to alter them. They're not born that way. I want to say it again. We're manufacturing transgender kids. None of us should be a party to altering a kid's mind, his psyche, and sending him down the path where they're going to sit up here and say how their life was torn apart. And I'm the fortunate one. I got sober. I'm 33 years sober. I drank heavily and used cocaine as a way to try to mask the pain from having undergone the surgery, as a way to cope with what Grandma did in a purple dress that confused me. That when I was a little boy at 4, 5, and 6 years old, I began to want to be affirmed. I began to enjoy being affirmed. I became addicted to the affirmation and the attention. I mean, if a kid wants to steal all of the attention out of the room, all they have to do is say, "I am a transgender." They can suck the life out of a room in a heartbeat. And the focus is right on them. And they can get anything they want, can't they? Nobody calls them out. Nobody says, how'd you come to this conclusion? Well, we know how they came to the conclusion. Schools are giving them books. They're indoctrinating them. Parents are encouraging them. Online, they're in chat rooms suggesting groups of kids become transgender. It's a fad. Yes, there are people who are autogynephilia, but there's also people who are deeply troubled. Over 50% of the people that I've worked with, hundreds of people that I've worked with over the last 10 years, were sexually abused. Boys who are abused at a young age come to the conclusion that the only way they can prevent themselves from being sexually abused again is to cut off their genitalia and become females. In their mind, that is their defense mechanism for sexual abuse. Girls who are sexually abused want to be men as a way to fend off any intruder or sexual abuser, because they will no longer be attractive for sexual abuse. Whether it's men or women, vast majority of them were abused as children. Many of them I sit with and talk with privately are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s before they're ever able for the first time to disclose they were sexually abused. It's too painful. I was sexually abused at 9 years old, multiple times, by my uncle. When I told my parents I was sexually abused, they said, "Oh, Uncle Fred wouldn't do that." Wrong. They said I was a liar. So now I had worn a purple dress as a 4-year-old. I'd been sexually abused, and now I'm a liar. You know, it's not a real good way to start off life, and you're not only 9 years old yet. We've got to start helping the young people. And when people ask for help from me, I have one simple thing I always ask them. Tell me what caused you to not want to be who you are. 100% of the time, they can tell me. They can tell me. I'm feeling the pain right now of them sharing with me some of these stories, because even I weep. They're ugly. They're horrible. They're so deep, nobody wants to talk about it. But we better start talking about it. We're ruining an entire generation of young people. And it's serious business. I'm not pulling any punches anymore. And you shouldn't either. Thank you.